The big surprise is that blue states, as well as some red states, would be the worst affected by expiration of the 2017 law.
Welcome to Examining Tax Policy. I'm Amy Delora for Washington Examiner, and we're joined here today by Pete Sepp, president of the National Taxpayers Union. Now, we've just wrapped up tax season, which, despite the commercials showing how fun, exciting, and easy it is, it actually causes the average American a lot of anxiety. In fact, a new poll shows 80% of voters believe they will struggle to pay for everyday expenses if taxes were to rise. So regardless of political association, it's something that causes major concern. Now, the Trump tax cuts, or the Tax Jobs Act, is set to expire at the end of the year. What kind of economic costs could that cause families if Congress were to let it expire?
Well, the costs are major. They're in fact catastrophic. When you look at the whole economy, some studies have shown that as many as 6 million jobs could be lost, as much as $500 billion in wages could be lost, and upwards of $1 trillion of economic growth could be at stake. Now, those are big numbers, but if you boil it down to a typical household, you're talking about a minimum of $2,000 for the median income household. If that household happens to have more than one kid, you're talking about even more losses. Just go through the provisions one by one. The child tax credit would be cut in half. That's a $1,000 tax hike for each qualifying kid. The qualifying small business deduction would go away if you happen to have, say, $40,000 of qualified business income. That's a huge tax increase, more than $2,000. Your rates would go up as well. Big companies and little companies alike would lose the ability to immediately write off the equipment that they're investing in. All of those things would amount to a massive economic slowdown for businesses and for families.
Now, you sent out a new report through the National Taxpayer Foundation saying there are 10 states who will be most affected if this policy were to expire. Why these 10 states, and what are they seeing the most in their cost?
The big surprise is that blue states, as well as some red states, would be the worst affected by expiration of the 2017 law. That's because many states, red and blue, tie their tax systems to the federal model. The definitions of income, what's taxable, what's deductible, what kinds of credits you can take are mirrored in these state systems. And so you have states like Colorado, Connecticut, New Jersey among the most affected. Those are blue and purple states, not just red states.
And other than saving people money, how else did the tax cuts help?
The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a time saver, an anxiety saver, not just a money saver. That's because it did things like double the standard deduction, get rid of the dreaded alternative minimum tax, a whole complex parallel tax system that millions of households had to face prior to 2017. So what that did in total was allow people to file their taxes with less time, less out-of-pocket expense, less hassle. It simplified the system. We would lose all of that simplification if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act were allowed to expire.
Now, tariffs are basically like a transportation tax. If the U.S. were not to be able to come to agreements with the big 10 countries and the 90-day pause were to lapse in July, how could Americans see that in their next tax season or just in their everyday purchases?
Yeah, tariffs are taxes on trade, on imports, on many of the goods that we normally buy. They get passed along to us in the form of higher prices, or they get passed along in the form of reduced business activity on our side of the ocean, not overseas. They could easily wipe out all of the benefits of extending the 2017 tax cut law if the trade war is allowed to continue and take its toll on our own economy. That's why we do need to settle quickly these trade disputes on our terms, of course, but in short time. Otherwise, the American people are going to continue to suffer more and more.
Well, Pete Sepp, president of the National Taxpayers Union, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can get a link to this article by clicking here. And for more exclusive interviews, straight news, and conservative views, head to washingtonexaminer.com.